Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to the SR-71 BLACKBIRD, the fastest plane ever built. Now, this plane, whenever I see photos of it, it looks kind of, or it reminds me of the plane from X-Men. You know, the X-Wing from the original 90s cartoon. It is such a stunning plane. For me, in terms of aesthetics, for me, it's the SR-71, it's the F-22, and it's the B-2, and perhaps Concorde. Like, for me, those are the four best looking aircraft ever built. This one just, it's crazy because apparently this was designed of something in the 60s or something like that. And it looks so futuristic. Like, to me, this looks like a plane from the future, which is almost like a testament to the design, you know, the people behind it. You know, they built a plane that to this day is just probably faster than anything we've got. Just a crazy, crazy plane. I can't wait to learn about it and, you know, learn all of the sort of the things that went into the design and stuff like that. It's going to be a lot of fun. By the way, guys, if you enjoy my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing, and also check out the Patreon for exclusive content. Let's do it. Just stunning.
SR-71 BLACKBIRD, America's old super spy plane, is still the world's fastest jet.
Wow, really? The fastest still? Why haven't we built anything faster?
The sleek and sinister SR-71 BLACKBIRd looks like it belongs in a science fiction movie. Though, in fact, the jet black spy plane proved far more successful at outrunning enemy missiles than any of the spaceships depicted in Star Wars. Though retired in the 1990s in favor of spy satellites and recon drones, it doesn't look like any modern designs are likely to challenge the Blackbird's record as the fastest manned aircraft ever. Stealthy
Really?
speedster.
Oh, God, the front shot here. Ah.
As Cold War tensions heightened during the 1950s, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, began flying the U-2 spy plane to keep tabs on the Soviet Union's fast-expanding nuclear weapons capabilities. Ungainly and relatively slow-moving, the U-2 relied upon its ability to fly at extremely high altitudes to avoid enemy fighters and early surface-to-air missiles. The intelligence provided by U-2s in 1962 uncovered the Soviet nuclear missiles deployed to Cuba, leading to the dramatic events of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the U-2s also provoked diplomatic incidents because they simply couldn't fly high enough to avoid Russian SA-2 surface-to-air missiles. A U-2 was shot down in 1960, and its pilot Gary Powers captured, triggering an embarrassing diplomatic row. Another U-2 was shot down during the Cuban Missile Crisis, killing the pilot and escalating tensions between Moscow and Washington at a critical moment.
Oh my goodness,
5 Taiwanese U-2s were shot down over China. American engineers realized altitude was no longer an adequate defense, and in 1957 began working on a plane for the CIA that they hoped Soviet radar would be unable to detect, and that could outrun any missiles fired at it. The Lockheed Skunk Works factory ultimately developed the A-12, codenamed Archangel. The prototype was first tested in Area 51 in 1962, and in the end, 15 A-12s were produced. CIA Lockheed A-12s flew a total of 29 spy missions over North Korea and Vietnam through 1968 in Operation Black Shield, losing 6 aircraft to accidents. Intelligence gathered by A-12 helped the CIA to map out North Vietnamese air defenses and locate the USS Pueblo after it was hijacked by North Korea. The Air Force developed prototypes of an interceptor version, the YF-12, and later considered a high-speed bomber, the B-71, coming numerically after the XB-70 Valkyrie bomber that never entered production. There was even a bizarre M21 drone carrier that launched a D-21 spy drone off its back. However, none of these spin-offs entered service, and the A-12 was retired in favor of an Air Force-operated variant, the SR-71.
Gotcha.
The Blackbird consists.
It's always fun, like, hearing the conception of these planes, like, because there's always usually precursors, like initial prototypes and stuff, It's so interesting.
Sustained speeds above Mach 3, with a so far unbroken manned flight record of Mach 3.3 or 3.5. 3.3 is confirmed, while Mach 3.5 is claimed by pilot Brian Schull to have been achieved while outrunning a missile over Libya in 1986. That speed is actually even more impressive than it seems, because while later Soviet MiG-25 and MiG-31 fighters could attain Mach 3, they could only do so for brief periods on afterburners, the aerial equivalent of an energy-burning sprint.
And don't afterburners like alert an enemy to your whereabouts and stuff? Because they'll show up on their radar, won't they?
The SR-71 could sustain Mach 3 flight for 90 minutes, at which
And they use a lot of fuel.
points it required in-flight refueling. A Blackbird once set the record for flying from New York to London in 1 hour and 54 minutes.
Wow, an hour.
In effect, by the time it took a SAM missile system to lock onto an SR-71 traveling at Mach 3 and launch a missile, the Blackbird was already moving beyond the effective range of the missile. But Lockheed wasn't just counting on speed to evade enemy missiles. The Blackbird was the first operational airplane intentionally designed with a reduced radar cross-section to minimize the chance of detection. The Blackbird's chines, the knife-like tapered edges of the fuselage, were even coated with early radar-absorbent iron ferrite paint to help lower radar detection ranges. The chines were also found to provide additional lift and greater aerodynamic stability. However, the Blackbird wasn't a stealth plane by modern standards. It had a cross-section of 10 square meters, which Soviet radar technology soon proved capable of detecting anyway. Adding to the problem was the enormous heat exhaust plumes the SR-71's engines generated, which disrupted the air particles behind it in a manner visible to radar. Fortunately, the Blackbird also mounted a radar jammer and other electronic countermeasures for confusing enemy missiles. To cap it all off, it was capable of sustained flight at 85,000 feet.
It seems a lot bigger as well. Like, I'm just looking at the cockpit in contrast with the actual whole thing. Like, how much bigger was an SR-72 compared to, let's say, an F-22 or an F-35? Because this thing looks huge.
Another unbroken record, and employed an astro-inertial navigation system that used the stars overhead to calculate the plane's position. An impressive record. The first operational SR-71 unit was activated in 1968, based at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. The locals nicknamed the recon birds Habu, pit vipers, a nickname which stuck among Blackbird pilots. They went on to fly numerous reconnaissance missions over Vietnam, and while the plane performed well, it seems those who would want to take the plane down as the ultimate trophy were catching up. American pilots soon discovered that the Blackbird's reduced radar cross-section wasn't an effective defense by itself. Russian-made radars were powerful enough to track the Habu and launch missiles. However, they learned the SR-71's speed did not work as a defense. Around 800 missiles were fired at Blackbirds over Vietnam alone, but not a single one was lost to enemy fire.
Not one. That is just impressive. 800, none successful.
Although one CIA A-12 did take a piece of shrapnel from an SA-2 missile that exploded 100 meters away. Blackbirds went on to fly over 3,551 reconnaissance missions over the next 30 years, flying over the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and Asia. 11 SR-71s were lost in accidents, though all but one pilot survived. Not one was lost to hostile fire.
This might be a dumb question, but how do these planes do recon? You know, when they're in the air so high up, how are they able to, observe? Is it with like really powerful cameras that they can zoom down on like a testing facility and see what's going on? Like, how do they gather information and send it back to, Washington or wherever? Like,
Blackbird pilot Colonel James Shelton Jr. recounted how his plane flew an epic 11.5-hour mission to photograph Israeli army positions near the end of the Yom Kippur War. Along the way, he overflew Egyptian airspace and was tracked by multiple radar sites and interceptors, but none of them could keep up. The photos he took later established that Israeli troops were further in Egyptian territory than they had admitted, leading the U.S. to successfully pressure Israel into withdrawing its forces. Blackbirds also flew recon missions off the Russian coast, though not over Russia itself, evading all of the Mach 3 MiG-25 fighters sent after them. Soviet defector Viktor Belenko wrote in his biography, MiG Pilot, they taunted and toyed with the MiG-25 sent up to intercept them, scooting up to altitudes the Soviet planes could not reach, and circling leisurely above them or dashing off at speeds the Russians could not match.
That would have annoyed those Soviet pilots so much, because there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do, literally.
Yet the Blackbird had shortcomings. It was expensive to operate, costing more than $100,000 per hour flown, according to one estimate. Furthermore, an SR-71 required an average of a week of maintenance between each mission because the high-speed flights often cause bits and pieces of the airplane to loosen or come off.
I see.
More importantly, spy satellites and drones could handle these strategic missions that the SR-71 was supposed to perform.
Doesn't this plane look a bit like a dolphin? There's something about the front of it.
And the Blackbird, which relied on 1960s technology, had no data link to transmit its intelligence data back to base. So it was not considered ideal for providing data in a time-sensitive manner.
Gotcha.
The SR-71 was first retired in 1989, before 3 airframes were brought back into service in 1994. However, the operating costs of the small fleet were extremely high. Despite attempts by politicians like Senator John Glenn to save the program, the Air Force wanted to redirect funding to other projects. The SR-71 was finally withdrawn from service in 1998. NASA's 2 Blackbirds were retired the following year. For years, there were rumors of an even faster spy plane, the Aurora.
Yeah, I've heard that there's an SR-72 currently in production.
But its existence seems unlikely at this point. Rather, the Pentagon relies on drones and satellites if it needs to cast an eye on a well-defended location. Why risk lives and diplomatic incidents using manned aircraft? The still classified RQ-180 Global Hawk stealth drone currently in development is believed to be the effective successor of the Blackbird. What about gathering intel over places where there is no threat from surface-to-air missiles? Then the Air Force can call upon the venerable 1950s-era U-2, which in heavily upgraded form is now flying photo reconnaissance missions over Iraq, having outlasted its successor by 2 decades and counting.
Wow.
Nonetheless, it looks like the Blackbird will remain the queen of speed for some time to come.
Seems like it. Although, let's see if there's going to be an SR-72. Man, I really enjoyed that. It seems like the cost of running the program was the main sort of killer of it, I think. $100,000 an hour is just a mind-boggling sum of money. And also the week that you needed to maintain and bring the aircraft back into operation. Yeah, it just means that if you need to get one up in the air quickly, unless you've got a really large fleet of them, you just aren't going to be able to rely on it. And also, I do think from what I'm reading that the future of, high-speed air, military sort of operations is going to be without pilots, I think. I think long-term, you're going to see more unmanned aircraft for sure, just because they can fly faster without a human being in them. Because obviously a human being can only sustain a certain amount of Gs, before they start, really being physically damaged. And it's safer. It's just safer, really. So I do think that's where the future is heading, unmanned aircraft. But for me, the SR-71 is just an unbelievable plane. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.